Ella Parker had always believed that art could heal souls, but she never expected it to shatter hers completely. Standing before the mesmerizing canvas, titled Fragments of Tomorrow, at the prestigious Meridian Gallery in downtown San Francisco, she felt her breath catch in her throat. The painting depicted a lighthouse, standing resilient against a stormy sea, its beam cutting through darkness with unwavering determination. It reminded her so much of her cousin Marcus, lost to the streets and addiction, yet still holding that flicker of hope she desperately tried to nurture. The gallery was bustling with San Francisco's cultural elite, their conversations creating a sophisticated hum that mixed with the gentle classical music playing in the background. Ella had splurged on a new dress for this opening, a simple navy blue piece that made her feel elegant without being ostentatious. She had saved for months to attend this event, knowing that exposure to art always rejuvenated her spirit and gave her strength for the challenging work she did at the psychosocial clinic. Beautiful piece, is it not? A deep, warm voice spoke beside her, causing her to turn. The man standing there was tall, with kind eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. His presence was magnetic, yet there was something wonderfully understated about him. He wore a well-tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quality without flashiness, and his genuine smile immediately put her at ease. The artist captures the essence of perseverance in the face of adversity. Ella found herself studying his face, noting how his genuine appreciation for the art matched her own. There was something about his demeanor that suggested depth and thoughtfulness, qualities she rarely encountered in her daily interactions. "Yes, it speaks to me on so many levels," she replied, her voice carrying the passion she felt for her work in social services. "Sometimes I feel like that lighthouse, trying to guide people home when they have lost their way." Gary O'Connor had attended countless gallery openings as part of his family's social obligations, but this was the first time someone's interpretation of art had moved him so profoundly. This woman, with her expressive hazel eyes and authentic presence, seemed to see beyond the surface of everything around her. Her response revealed a depth of character that immediately intrigued him. "That is a beautiful way to view it," he said, extending his hand with a smile that reached his eyes. "I am Gary, and I have a feeling you have many stories about guiding people home." "Ella," she responded, accepting his handshake and feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her. His handshake was firm but gentle, and she noticed the calluses that suggested he did more than just sit behind a desk. "And you would be right. Though sometimes I wonder if I'm making any real difference." She paused, studying his face more intently, noting the way he listened, with his entire attention focused on her. "You have an interesting perspective on art for someone who seems more like a business type." Their conversation flowed naturally as they moved through the gallery, discussing various pieces and sharing their interpretations. Gary found himself captivated not just by Ella's beauty, but by her genuine passion for helping others. She spoke about her work at the psychosocial clinic with such dedication that it made his own corporate responsibilities seem trivial in comparison. When she described a recent success story about helping a young mother overcome addiction and regain custody of her children, her face lit up with a joy that was absolutely radiant. "What brings you to gallery openings?" Ella asked as they paused before a sculpture of intertwined figures reaching toward light. The piece was abstract, but somehow conveyed hope and connection in a way that made both of them pause in contemplation. Gary hesitated, torn between his usual polite deflection and an unusual desire to be honest with this woman. There was something about Ella that made him want to share more of himself than he typically revealed to strangers. "My sister owns a company that manages young artists and establishes galleries. I come to support her work, though I confess I am discovering a genuine appreciation for art tonight." He looked at her meaningfully, his voice taking on a softer tone. "Sometimes we find beauty in the most unexpected places." Ella felt her cheeks warm at his words and the way he was looking at her. There was something about Gary that felt different from other men she had met. He listened intently when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions about her work, and seemed genuinely interested in her perspective rather than trying to impress her with his own achievements. "Your sister sounds like she has a wonderful business. It must be fulfilling to help young artists find their voices and establish their careers. She is passionate about it, though sometimes her protective nature extends beyond her artist to her family as well," Gary said, with a slight smile that held a hint of complexity. There was something in his tone that suggested this was not entirely a positive trait. "She has very strong opinions about who should and should not be part of our lives." Before Ella could ask what he meant, an elegantly dressed woman approached them with purposeful steps. She was strikingly beautiful in a polished way that spoke of professional styling and expensive maintenance. Her designer dress and jewelry were impeccable, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Gary, darling, I've been looking everywhere for you," she said, her eyes quickly assessing Ella with barely concealed disapproval. "The Hendersons are asking about the new port development project, and Father specifically wanted you to discuss the logistics timeline with them." Gary's expression shifted subtly, becoming more guarded, and Ella immediately sensed the change in atmosphere. "Rebecca, I would like you to meet Ella Parker." "Ella, this is my sister Rebecca." Rebecca's smile was polite but cold, the kind of smile that wealthy women had perfected for dealing with people they considered beneath their social status. "How lovely to meet you, Ella. Are you in the art business as well?" "No, I work in social services," Ella replied, sensing the undercurrent of tension and evaluation in Rebecca's gaze. "I am here because I truly appreciate art and its power to inspire change and healing." "How admirable," Rebecca said in a tone that suggested otherwise, her voice carrying just enough condescension to be insulting without being overtly rude. "Gary, we really should not keep the Hendersons waiting. You know how Father feels about maintaining business relationships, especially with the international expansion plans moving forward." Ella watched the interaction with growing understanding. This was not just about business obligations. Rebecca was clearly marking her territory and sending a message about social boundaries. The way she emphasized their father's expectations and the family business suggested that Gary's time and attention were not his own to give freely. "Of course, I should not keep you from your commitments," she said graciously, though disappointment flickered in her eyes. Gary felt frustration building as he recognized his sister's interference for what it was. He had seen Rebecca employ these tactics before with women he had shown interest in, though none of those relationships had mattered enough to him to fight for them. This felt different, and he was not willing to let Rebecca's controlling behavior dictate the course of this evening. "Actually, Rebecca, I was hoping to continue our conversation about the lighthouse painting," he said to Ella, his voice carrying a subtle challenge to his sister's presumption. "Perhaps another time," Ella said diplomatically, though her heart was racing. She could feel the tension between the siblings and did not want to be the cause of family conflict. "It was wonderful meeting you both." As she began to walk away, Gary made a decision that surprised even himself. "Ella, wait." When she turned back, he smiled, that genuine smile that had first caught her attention, the one that seemed to light up his entire face and made the corners of his eyes crinkle attractively. "Would you like to have coffee sometime? I would love to hear more about your work, and perhaps we could discuss art some more." Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was audible, but Gary kept his eyes on Ella, waiting for her answer. He could feel his sister's disapproval radiating beside him, but for once in his life, he did not care about maintaining family harmony at the expense of his own desires. "I would like that very much," Ella replied, feeling as though she was stepping into something that would change her life forever. There was something in Gary's eyes that promised adventure, depth, and possibilities she had never dared to imagine for herself. 3 days later, Ella found herself nervously adjusting her simple blue cardigan as she waited at Café Luna, a cozy waterfront spot that Gary had suggested. The cafe was charming in an understated way, with weathered wooden tables, mismatched vintage chairs, and large windows that offered spectacular views of the San Francisco Bay. She had spent the morning working with a particularly difficult case at the clinic, trying to help a young mother navigate the complexities of addiction recovery while maintaining custody of her children. The work was emotionally draining, but it was moments like these, when she was about to embark on something new and hopeful, that reminded her why she chose to see the good in people, despite all evidence to the contrary. Gary arrived precisely on time, carrying a small wrapped package that immediately caught her attention. He looked more relaxed than he had at the gallery, wearing dark jeans and a soft grey sweater that made his eyes appear more blue than grey. "I hope I am not late," he said, though his watch indicated he was exactly punctual. "I brought you something." "You did not need to bring me anything," Ella protested, though her curiosity was clearly piqued. She was not accustomed to receiving gifts from men she barely knew, and the gesture both touched and slightly worried her. "We barely know each other." "That is precisely why I brought it," Gary replied with that smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "I thought about our conversation regarding the lighthouse painting, and I remembered something I had that might interest you." Inside the package was a small, beautifully crafted compass made of brass and silver with an inscription that read, "For those who guide others home." The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly antique and well-maintained, and Ella could tell immediately that it held significant sentimental value. She looked up at him with wonder and concern. "Gary, this is beautiful, but I cannot accept something so personal and obviously valuable. It belonged to my grandfather, who was a naval officer," Gary explained, his voice taking on a softer, more vulnerable tone. "He served in the Pacific during World War II and later worked in maritime logistics. He always said that the most important journeys are not the ones we take alone, but the ones where we help others find their way. When I heard you talk about being a lighthouse for people, I knew he would have wanted you to have it." Ella felt tears prick her eyes as she held the compass carefully in her hands, feeling the weight of both the object and the trust Gary was placing in her. "This is incredibly meaningful. Are you sure you want to give this away to someone you just met?" "I am not giving it away," Gary said gently, reaching across to touch her hand briefly. "I am passing it on to someone who will honor its purpose better than I ever could. My grandfather taught me that some people come into our lives to change our direction entirely. I have a feeling you might be one of those people." Their coffee date stretched into lunch, then into a long walk along the waterfront. The afternoon was crisp and clear, with seagulls wheeling overhead and the distant sound of foghorns creating a quintessentially San Francisco soundtrack. Gary found himself sharing stories about his work in port logistics, his passion for hiking in the marine headlands, and his special relationship with his autistic nephew, Jamie. "Jamie sees the world in ways that constantly amaze me," he said as they watched boats navigate the bay. "He has taught me that sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones others overlook or dismiss too quickly." Ella spoke about her cousin Marcus, her voice filled with both love and frustration. "He was so talented, so full of life before the addiction took hold. He could make anyone laugh, had this incredible ability to see the absurd humor in any situation. I refuse to give up on him, even though everyone else has. Sometimes I think I see glimpses of who he used to be, and it gives me hope that he is still in there somewhere, fighting to get back out." "That must be incredibly difficult," Gary said, admiring the strength and determination he heard in her voice. "But I imagine Marcus is lucky to have someone who believes in him so completely, even when he might not believe in himself. Some days I wonder if I am being naive or foolish," Ella admitted, stopping to lean against the railing overlooking the water. "My parents worry that I'm going to burn out, that I care too much about people who might not be able to be saved. They see how emotionally invested I get in my cases, how much of myself I pour into trying to help people who sometimes do not want to be helped." Gary stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his expression serious and intent. "The world needs more people who care too much, not fewer. Your compassion is not a weakness, Ella. It is your greatest strength, and anyone who tries to convince you otherwise is wrong. As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that reflected off the water, Gary realized he had never felt so comfortable with anyone before. Ella had a way of making him feel seen and understood in a way that was completely foreign to his usual social interactions. With her, he did not feel the need to perform or maintain the careful facade that his family position required. "I should probably head home," Ella said reluctantly as they made their way back toward the city center. "I have an early morning tomorrow, and I promised my dog Lulu a proper walk tonight. He gets quite indignant if his routine is disrupted." "You have a dog?" Gary asked, his face lighting up with genuine interest. "I have a Pekingese named Lalika. She is spoiled beyond measure and has the attitude to prove it. She thinks she owns our entire house and everyone in it." Ella laughed, a sound that Gary realized he wanted to hear as often as possible. "Lulu is quite the character himself. He is supposed to be my walking companion and exercise motivation, but he spends most of our walks trying to chase seagulls and investigate every interesting smell we encounter. I swear he has memorized the scent profile of every tree in our neighborhood. Perhaps they could meet sometime," Gary suggested, then caught himself sounding overeager. "I mean, if you would like to have another coffee or walk or—" He trailed off, suddenly feeling like a teenager asking someone to prom rather than a successful businessman in his late 20s. "I would love that," Ella said warmly, touched by his slight nervousness. "But Gary, I need to be honest about something. I could tell your sister was not thrilled about meeting me the other night. I do not want to cause problems in your family or make things complicated for you." Gary's expression grew more serious as he considered how to respond honestly without alarming her about the extent of Rebecca's controlling tendencies. "Rebecca has always been protective, sometimes to a fault. She has very specific ideas about who should be part of our social circle and what kinds of relationships are appropriate for family members." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But my life is my own, and I would very much like you to be part of it, if you are willing to deal with some family complexity." Ella felt her heart flutter at his words, but also sensed the deeper implications of what he was saying. "Are you sure you are ready for that kind of complication? Family relationships can be delicate, and I would hate to be the reason for conflict." "I have never been more ready for anything in my life," Gary replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "The question is, are you ready to stop letting other people's potential disapproval dictate your choices?" As they said goodbye that evening, both knew that something significant had shifted between them. What had started as a chance encounter at an art gallery was becoming something neither of them had expected, but both desperately wanted to explore. The compass Gary had given her felt warm in Ella's pocket as she walked home, a tangible reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single step in an unexpected direction. However, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, taking careful note of their interaction and already planning the next move in what would become a calculated campaign to drive them apart. The following week brought unexpected challenges that would test the fragile beginning of Gary and Ella's connection in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Ella had just finished a particularly difficult session with Marcus, who had shown up at the clinic in worse condition than she had seen him in months. His clothes were torn and dirty, his eyes held a vacant quality that broke her heart, and he seemed barely aware of her presence, despite her gentle attempts to reach him. "Marcus, please let me help you," she pleaded, as he sat slumped in the chair across from her desk in the small counseling room. The afternoon light filtering through the windows seemed to highlight just how much weight he had lost and how fragile he had become. "There is a new program that has shown real success with long-term recovery. You just have to want to try, just have to take that first step." "You do not understand, Ella," Marcus mumbled, his words slurred and disconnected, his gaze focused on something she could not see. "I am too far gone. Some people cannot be saved, no matter how much you want to save them. Some of us are just meant to be cautionary tales. The defeat in his voice was devastating, but what frightened Ella even more was the resignation she heard there. Marcus had always maintained some spark of defiance, some ember of his former self that she could fan into hope. Today, even that seemed to have been extinguished. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gary asking if she was free for dinner, including a suggestion for a new restaurant that had received excellent reviews. Under normal circumstances, the message would have made her smile and filled her with anticipation. But she could not even think about her personal life when Marcus was in such a deteriorating state. She spent the next 4 hours making phone calls, trying to find him a bed in a treatment facility, coordinating with social services, speaking with his parole officer, and ultimately arranging for him to stay at a temporary shelter for the night. The process was exhausting and frustrating, involving bureaucratic hurdles and waiting lists that seemed designed to discourage rather than help people in crisis. By the time she finally responded to Gary's message, it was nearly midnight. "Sorry for the late response. Had a family emergency with my cousin. Rain check on dinner." Gary, who had been checking his phone regularly throughout the evening and growing increasingly concerned, immediately called her. "Ella, are you all right? Do you need anything? Can I help in some way?" The concern in his voice, the immediate offer of support without even knowing the details, nearly brought her to tears. "It is my cousin Marcus. He is struggling more than usual. I spent the evening trying to get him help, but sometimes I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle against a system that seems designed to fail people like him." "Where are you now?" Gary asked without hesitation, already reaching for his car keys. "Just getting home. I am exhausted, but I do not think I can sleep. My mind is racing with all the things I should have done differently, all the ways I might have failed him." She paused, trying to control the emotion in her voice. "Sometimes I wonder if I am just prolonging his suffering instead of actually helping him." "You did not fail him," Gary said firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "You showed up for him when everyone else had given up. You fought for him when he could not fight for himself. That matters more than you know, even if the results are not immediately visible." Ella found herself crying then, not just from exhaustion, but from the relief of having someone who understood, someone who did not judge her for caring so much, or suggest that she should establish better boundaries. "Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it more than you know." "Can I see you tomorrow?" Gary asked gently. "I know you have a lot on your mind, but maybe we could take a walk with our dogs. Sometimes fresh air and simple companionship can help put things in perspective." Meanwhile, Rebecca O'Connor was having her own conversation about Ella, though it was decidedly less supportive. She had hired a private investigator to look into this woman who had so quickly captured her brother's attention, and the information she was reviewing only confirmed her worst suspicions about the situation. "So she works in social services, making barely $30,000 a year, comes from a middle-class family with no social connections, and has a cousin with multiple drug-related arrests and a history of treatment failures," Rebecca said to her assistant as she reviewed the comprehensive file. "This is exactly the kind of complication Gary does not need in his life, especially now." "Should I schedule a meeting with the family lawyer to discuss potential protective measures?" her assistant asked. "Not yet," Rebecca replied, her mind already formulating a more subtle plan. "But I think it might be time for Gary to understand exactly what kind of woman he is getting involved with, and what kind of baggage she brings with her." The next day, Gary and Ella met at Chrissy Field with their dogs, both of whom immediately began an elaborate sniffing and circling ritual that made their owners laugh despite the emotional weight of recent events. Lulu, an energetic mixed breed with boundless curiosity, seemed fascinated by Leleka's regal bearing, while Leleka appeared both intrigued and slightly offended by Lulu's enthusiastic attention. "How are you feeling today?" Gary asked as they began walking along the waterfront path, the Golden Gate Bridge, providing a spectacular backdrop to their conversation. Better, though still worried about Marcus, Ella admitted, grateful for the peaceful setting and Gary's calming presence. I managed to get him into a short-term program, but he has to want to stay. I cannot force him to get clean, cannot make him choose recovery over the familiarity of addiction. Gary watched her face as she spoke, noting the way her eyes reflected both determination and sadness. There was something beautiful about her refusal to give up on people, even when it caused her pain. You know, my nephew Jamie has taught me something important about helping people, he said thoughtfully. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply be present and consistent, even when we cannot fix everything or control the outcome. That is wise advice from someone so young, Ella said, appreciating how Gary always seemed to understand exactly what she needed to hear. Tell me more about Jamie. You mentioned he is autistic. Gary's face lit up as he began describing his 12-year-old nephew, Rebecca's son, and how Jamie had fundamentally changed his perspective on life and relationships. He sees patterns and connections that others miss, processes information in ways that constantly surprise me. Last week, he organized all of my business cards by color and discovered that the companies with blue logos were more financially successful than those with red ones. When I checked the actual performance data, he was absolutely right. He sounds like an amazing kid, Ella said warmly, already imagining how much she would enjoy meeting this young person who had clearly captured Gary's heart. I would love to meet him sometime, if that would be appropriate. I would like that too, Gary replied, then hesitated as he considered the complexities involved. Though I should warn you that Rebecca is extremely protective of Jamie. She carefully controls who has access to him and does not let many people into his inner circle. Ella sensed there was much more to this story, but chose not to push for details. Instead, she focused on enjoying the moment, watching Gary interact with both dogs and seeing how gentle and patient he was with them. It was clear that he had a natural kindness that extended to all living things, a quality that made her feel even more drawn to him. Their peaceful morning was interrupted when Gary's phone rang with a call from Rebecca. Gary, we need to talk immediately. Can you come home? It is about the Henderson contract, and Father wants to discuss some urgent concerns about the timeline. Can it wait until this afternoon? Gary asked, not wanting to cut short his time with Ella and sensing that this was not really the emergency Rebecca was making it seem. It really cannot, Rebecca insisted, her voice carrying an edge of manufactured urgency. There have been some developments that require immediate attention and your input before we can move forward. Gary looked apologetically at Ella, frustration clear on his face. I'm sorry, but I think I need to deal with this family business situation. Rebecca would not call if it was not important. Of course, Ella said, though she could not shake the feeling that this was not really about business, but rather about separating her from Gary. I hope everything works out smoothly. As Gary drove home to his family's waterfront compound in Pacific Heights, he had no idea that Rebecca had orchestrated the entire situation to interrupt his time with Ella. Nor did he know that she had already begun implementing a more comprehensive plan that would test their relationship in ways neither of them could anticipate. The storm that had been brewing in the O'Connor family was about to break with full force, and Ella would find herself caught directly in its path. The confrontation Ella had been unconsciously preparing for arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon, but not in the way she had expected or could have defended against. She was leaving the clinic after a particularly successful session with a client when she found Rebecca O'Connor waiting by her modest Honda Civic, impeccably dressed despite the weather, and holding an umbrella that probably cost more than Ella's monthly car payment. Miss Parker, I wonder if we might have a brief conversation, Rebecca said with a smile that did not reach her eyes and carried undertones that immediately put Ella on guard. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss, and I think it would be beneficial for both of us to clear the air. Ella felt her stomach tighten with apprehension, but she maintained her composure and professional demeanor. Of course, though I am not sure what mutual interests we might have beyond both caring about Gary's well-being. My brother, for one, Rebecca replied smoothly, her tone suggesting that Ella's caring was presumptuous. And the welfare of my family for another. Perhaps we could sit in my car. It would be more comfortable than standing in the rain, and this conversation requires some privacy. Against her better judgment and every instinct telling her to decline, Ella agreed, settling into the luxurious interior of Rebecca's Mercedes while trying to process what was happening and prepare herself for whatever was coming. The car's interior was immaculate and expensive, from the leather seats to the high-end sound system, representing a level of wealth that was completely foreign to Ella's experience. Rebecca did not waste time with pleasantries or attempt to soften what she had come to say. I am going to be direct with you, Miss Parker, because I believe you are a decent person who simply does not understand the situation you have walked into or the potential consequences of continuing down this path. I appreciate directness, Ella said carefully, though she was beginning to understand that this conversation was going to be far more difficult than she had imagined. Gary is at a very crucial point in his career, Rebecca began, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a business presentation. Our family business is expanding internationally, with partnerships in Asia and Europe that represent the future of our company. Gary is being considered for a position that would make him the youngest executive vice president in our company's history, with responsibilities that could shape the next generation of our family's legacy. I am happy for him, Ella said carefully, though she was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading and feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the implications. The problem is that his personal life is being scrutinized as part of this process, Rebecca continued, her voice remaining frustratingly calm and reasonable. Our business partners are very traditional, very concerned with image and stability and the kind of social connections that facilitate successful international commerce. They need to see that Gary is making mature, strategic decisions in all areas of his life. Ella felt heat rising in her cheeks as the insult became clear. Are you suggesting that I am not a mature decision? I'm suggesting that you come from very different worlds, Rebecca replied, maintaining her composed demeanor while delivering what felt like calculated blows. Your work with addiction recovery, your family situation with your cousin's criminal history, your background and social connections, these are all things that could reflect poorly on Gary at a critical time in his career development. Has Gary expressed these concerns to you? Ella asked, though she was dreading the answer and already feeling her confidence beginning to crumble under Rebecca's systematic attack. Rebecca paused for effect before delivering her most calculated blow. Gary is too kind and too much of a gentleman to say it directly, but yes, he has mentioned that your relationship might be moving too quickly for comfort. He's concerned about your emotional investment in your cousin's recovery and whether you have the emotional bandwidth for a serious relationship while dealing with such significant family drama. Ella felt the words hit her like physical blows, each one targeting her deepest insecurities about her work, her family, and her worthiness of someone like Gary. Everything Rebecca was saying played into fears she had been trying to suppress since their first meeting. I see, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I have done some research into your background, Rebecca continued, producing a folder from her expensive purse with the efficiency of someone who had planned this conversation carefully. Your cousin has been arrested multiple times for drug-related offenses, has been in and out of treatment facilities without success, and frankly represents the kind of ongoing drama that Gary cannot afford to be associated with at this stage of his career. Marcus is family, Ella said firmly, finding her voice and some measure of strength despite feeling under attack. I will not abandon him because someone thinks he is inconvenient or embarrassing, and that loyalty is admirable in its way, Rebecca acknowledged with condescending approval. But you have to ask yourself if it is fair to Gary to bring him into such a complicated situation. He has worked his entire life to build a reputation and a career. Is your relationship worth risking his future and everything our family has worked to achieve? Ella stared out the rain-streaked window, feeling as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet, and everything she thought she understood about her relationship with Gary was being called into question. Everything with Gary had felt so natural, so right, but Rebecca was articulating fears that had been lurking in the back of her mind since their first meeting. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Ella asked quietly, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I am asking you to consider what is best for everyone involved," Rebecca replied, her voice taking on a tone of false compassion. "Gary cares about you. I can see that clearly. But sometimes caring about someone means protecting them from making decisions they will later regret. Decisions that could damage their future prospects and relationships." That evening, Ella sat in her small apartment with Lulu curled up beside her, staring at the compass Gary had given her and feeling more lost than she had in years. The inscription seemed to mock her now. "For those who guide others home." How could she guide anyone anywhere when she felt so completely lost herself and questioning everything she thought she knew about her own worth? Her phone buzzed with a text from Gary. "Missing you today. Can we have dinner tomorrow? I have something important I want to discuss with you." Ella stared at the message for a long time, Rebecca's words echoing in her mind and making her question whether Gary's important discussion might be the gentle end to their relationship that his sister had predicted. Finally, she responded, "Can we meet for coffee instead? I think we need to talk." The next morning, Gary arrived at their usual cafe with excitement written all over his face, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers that he knew Ella preferred over elaborate arrangements. His enthusiasm faltered immediately when he saw her expression, the way she sat with her shoulders slightly hunched as if protecting herself from an expected blow. "Ella, what is wrong?" he asked immediately, settling into the chair across from her and reaching for her hands instinctively. "You look like you have not slept in days." "I had an interesting conversation with your sister yesterday," Ella began, watching his face carefully for his reaction and trying to gauge whether Rebecca had been telling her the truth about Gary's concerns. Gary's expression shifted from concern to anger to resignation in the space of a few seconds, and she could see the exact moment when he understood what had happened. "What did Rebecca say to you?" "She explained some things about your career prospects and how my background might impact them," Ella said, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. She was very thorough in her research and very clear about the potential consequences. "Ella, whatever she said, whatever she thinks she knows about what is best for me, she is wrong," Gary said firmly, his voice carrying an intensity that surprised both of them. "Rebecca has always tried to control aspects of my life that are none of her business, and this time she has gone too far." "But she is not wrong about us coming from different worlds," Ella replied, her voice carrying the doubt that Rebecca had so skillfully planted. "I have been thinking about it, and maybe she has valid points. Your family has expectations, responsibilities, a certain way of life that I know nothing about. I do not want to be the reason you lose opportunities that you have worked for your entire life." Gary reached across the table and took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "You are not going to cost me anything, Ella. You are going to make my life richer and more meaningful than it has ever been. You make me want to be better than I am." "How can you be so sure?" Ella asked, tears threatening to spill over as she voiced her deepest fears. "We have known each other for such a short time. How do you know this is not just infatuation that will fade when the reality of our different backgrounds becomes clear?" "Because," Gary said, his voice growing more intense and passionate, "for the first time in my life, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. With you, I am not Gary the heir to the O'Connor empire or Gary the strategic business mind. I am just myself, and that feels more valuable than any career opportunity or family approval." Ella wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that what they had could overcome the obstacles that seemed to be mounting around them like storm clouds. But Rebecca's words echoed in her mind, and her own insecurities whispered that perhaps she was being selfish to pursue something that could hurt Gary in the long run. "I need some time to think," she said finally, the words feeling like they were tearing something inside her chest. "This is all moving so fast, and I do not want to make decisions based on emotion that we will both regret later." Gary felt panic rising in his chest as he recognized the tone in her voice and realized that Rebecca's poison was working exactly as intended. "Ella, please do not let Rebecca's interference push you away from something that could be wonderful for both of us." "I am not letting anyone push me anywhere," Ella replied, though her voice lacked conviction and they both knew it was not entirely true. "I am trying to be realistic about what we are facing and whether we are strong enough to handle it." As they parted that morning, both of them felt the weight of unspoken words and uncertain futures pressing down on them like a physical force. Gary drove home with determination building in his chest, ready to confront Rebecca about her meddling and make it clear that his life was his own to live. Ella walked home with Lulu, questioning everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and what she truly deserved in life. Neither of them realized that the most challenging test of their relationship was still to come, and that Rebecca's interference was only the beginning of the obstacles they would need to overcome. The family dinner that Friday evening at the O'Connor compound was supposed to be a celebration of Gary's upcoming promotion to Vice President of Strategic Development, but the tension in the elegant dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The compound itself was a testament to generations of O'Connor success, with manicured gardens, a private dock, and views of the Golden Gate Bridge that real estate agents could only dream of describing adequately. Gary had spent the day in heated conversations with Rebecca, demanding to know exactly what she had said to Ella, and making it abundantly clear that her interference in his personal life was no longer acceptable under any circumstances. The confrontation had been building for years, but Ella had become the catalyst that finally brought their fundamental differences about control and family loyalty to the surface. "I simply presented her with facts," Rebecca said calmly as she arranged place settings on the mahogany table that had hosted O'Connor family gatherings for 3 generations. If she chose to interpret those facts in a way that made her question the relationship, perhaps that says something important about the relationship itself. "It says something about your manipulation and your complete disregard for my happiness," Gary replied angrily, his usual diplomatic demeanor cracking under the pressure of watching Ella doubt everything they had built together. "You had no right to investigate her, no right to approach her, and certainly no right to manipulate her into doubting what we have together." Their father, Thomas O'Connor, entered the dining room with Gary's mother, Patricia, both of them sensing the conflict immediately. Thomas was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, while Patricia maintained the elegant composure that had made her a successful volunteer organizer and business executive in her own right. "What is all this shouting about?" Thomas asked in his commanding voice, the tone he had perfected during decades of boardroom negotiations and family crisis management. "Gary is upset because I pointed out some practical concerns about this woman he has been seeing," Rebecca explained, her tone suggesting she was the reasonable one in the situation and that Gary was being emotional and impractical. Patricia, who had spent the morning coordinating food distribution at her volunteer organization and was tired from dealing with logistical challenges, looked alert despite her exhaustion. "What woman?" "Gary, you have not mentioned anyone to us, which seems unusual if this is serious." "Because I knew this would happen," Gary said, gesturing toward Rebecca with frustration that had been building for months. "I knew that the moment I brought someone home, there would be investigations and judgment, and attempts to control my choices based on criteria that have nothing to do with my happiness or compatibility." "Son, we just want what is best for you," Thomas said, settling into his chair at the head of the table with the air of someone preparing to mediate a business negotiation. Rebecca has mentioned some concerns about this woman's background, and we think it might be wise to slow things down until we understand the situation better and can evaluate the potential implications. Her name is Ella Parker, Gary said firmly, his voice carrying a strength that surprised his family. She is a social worker who dedicates her life to helping people who cannot help themselves. She is kind, intelligent, compassionate, and she makes me want to be a better person than I have ever been. What more do you need to understand? We need to understand why she comes with so much baggage and complications, Rebecca interjected, her voice taking on the tone she used when presenting unfavorable business proposals to the board. An addicted cousin with a criminal record living on the streets, a family with no social connections or influence, a profession that pays barely enough to survive on. These are not the qualities we typically look for in a partner for someone in your position. Since when do we judge people by their family's struggles or their salary rather than their character? Gary demanded, his voice rising with indignation. I thought we were raised to value character and integrity above everything else, to measure people by their actions rather than their circumstances. Patricia, who had been listening quietly while observing the family dynamics, spoke up with a gentle but firm voice that carried the authority of years of managing both family and business crises. Gary, darling, no one is questioning this woman's character or suggesting she is not a good person. But Rebecca does have a point about the practical considerations. Your career is at a crucial stage, and the international partnerships we are developing require a certain level of social finesse and cultural understanding. Ella has more social finesse and cultural understanding in her little finger than most of the people in our social circle have in their entire bodies, Gary replied passionately. She just does not flaunt it or use it to make others feel inferior or excluded. She uses it to build bridges and help people. The conversation was interrupted by young Jamie, who had been listening from the doorway with the intense focus he brought to everything that interested him, and now entered the room with his characteristic direct approach to communication. Uncle Gary is sad, he announced matter-of-factly, his voice carrying the honesty that autism often brings to social situations. He was happy before, but now he is sad. Mum made him sad. Rebecca's face flushed with embarrassment and frustration at her son's blunt assessment of the situation. Jamie, please go back to your room. The adults are having a conversation that does not concern you. But Uncle Gary was happy with the art lady, Jamie continued, ignoring his mother's directive with the persistence that characterized his approach to subjects that captured his interest. He showed me her picture on his phone. She has kind eyes like Grandma Patricia, and she smiles like she means it. Patricia looked at her grandson with interest, recognizing the significance of his observation since Jamie was unusually perceptive about people's emotional states. Gary showed you a picture of Ella. She likes art and helps people who are sad, Jamie said, with the simple clarity that often cut through adult complications. Uncle Gary said she would like my drawings because she understands that art can make people feel better. Mom said she's not good enough for our family, but Uncle Gary says she is perfect. The room fell silent as everyone processed Jamie's innocent but devastatingly accurate summary of the situation. Gary looked at his nephew with gratitude, while Rebecca struggled to maintain her composure in the face of her son's unwitting betrayal of her machinations. Jamie, go to your room, please, Rebecca said more firmly, her voice carrying an edge of desperation. Why? Jamie asked with the logical persistence that characterized his autism and his complete inability to understand social subterfuge. I want Uncle Gary to be happy again. The art lady makes him happy, and happy people are nicer to be around. Thomas cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken and the way his grandson had inadvertently exposed the family's manipulation. Perhaps we should all take a step back and consider this situation more rationally. There is nothing irrational about my feelings for Ella, Gary said, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing in the argument. What is irrational is letting fear and prejudice dictate who I can and cannot love, and what is unacceptable is using manipulation and interference to destroy something beautiful. Love? Patricia asked, raising her eyebrows with surprise and concern. Gary, you have known this woman for a matter of weeks. How can you be certain that what you are feeling is love rather than infatuation? Sometimes that is all it takes, Gary replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Did you not know after your first few dates with Dad that he was the one you wanted to spend your life with? Patricia and Thomas exchanged a look that confirmed Gary's point and brought back memories of their own whirlwind courtship, much to Rebecca's visible frustration and growing desperation. This is different, Rebecca insisted, her voice taking on a note of panic as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. You two came from similar backgrounds, had similar goals and values and social connections. This woman brings complications that could affect not just Gary's career, but our entire family's reputation and standing in the community. What if she does? Gary asked, surprising everyone, including himself, with the boldness of his declaration. What if choosing love over convenience sometimes requires sacrifice? What if being happy and authentic is more important than maintaining some artificial standard that we have imposed on ourselves out of fear? That evening, as the family dinner ended in uncomfortable silence and unresolved tension, Gary made a decision that would change everything. He drove directly to Ella's apartment, determined to fight for what they had together, before Rebecca's poison could do any more damage to the foundation they had been building. He found Ella sitting on her building's front steps with Lulu, staring up at the stars that were barely visible through the city's light pollution. She looked up when she heard his car door close, and he could see that she had been crying, which made his heart ache with the desire to protect her from the pain his family had caused. I was hoping you would come, she said softly as he sat down beside her, Lulu immediately moving to investigate this newcomer who smelled like his person's happiness. I had a very illuminating conversation with my family tonight, Gary said, taking her hand and feeling relief when she did not pull away. Jamie told them that you make me happy, and he was absolutely right. But more than that, you make me feel like the person I have always wanted to be, but never had the courage to become. Gary, I have been thinking about what Rebecca said, and maybe she has some valid points that we should consider, Ella began. But Gary gently placed his finger over her lips to stop the words that he knew came from fear rather than her heart. The only valid point is that we come from different backgrounds, he said with absolute certainty. But that is not a weakness, Ella. It is our strength. You have shown me what it means to care about something bigger than profit margins and social status. You have reminded me that success means nothing if it comes at the cost of our humanity and our capacity for love. Ella looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and determination there, and feeling her resolve to protect him from her complications beginning to crumble. But what about your career? Your family's expectations? The partnerships and opportunities that Rebecca mentioned? My career will be what I make it, regardless of who I choose to love, Gary replied with conviction that surprised both of them. And my family will learn to accept that my happiness is not negotiable and that I will not sacrifice love for their approval. Are you sure you are ready for that kind of battle? Ella asked, though her heart was already answering for her and pulling her back toward the connection they had discovered. I have never been more ready for anything in my life, Gary said, pulling her closer and feeling complete for the first time since their difficult conversation that morning. The question is, are you ready to stop letting other people's fears dictate your choices and trust that what we have is worth fighting for? As they sat together under the city stars, both of them felt the shift that occurs when two people decide to fight for love instead of against it. The challenges they would face were real and significant, but their commitment to facing them together was stronger than any obstacle Rebecca or anyone else could put in their path. But neither of them could have predicted the crisis that would test their resolve in ways they never imagined and force them to prove that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. Epilogue. 1 year later, Gary and Ella stood together in the newly opened O'Connor Community Gallery in downtown San Francisco, watching as visitors admired the art that filled the bright, welcoming space. The gallery was a joint venture between Rebecca's artist management company and Gary's strategic development initiatives. But more importantly, it had become a symbol of how two very different worlds could come together to create something beautiful and meaningful that served the broader community. The gallery opening was more than just a business venture. It represented the healing that had taken place within the O'Connor family and the expansion of their understanding of what success and contribution could look like. The space itself was stunning, with high ceilings, natural light flooding through skylights, and carefully curated exhibitions that ranged from established artists to emerging talents from underserved communities. Marcus Parker, clean for 8 months and counting, was hanging his first piece in a professional gallery. A powerful sculpture made from recycled materials that spoke to themes of redemption, second chances, and the beauty that could emerge from broken things. The piece, titled Rising from Ashes, had already attracted the attention of several collectors and art critics, but more importantly, it represented Marcus' journey back to himself and his artistic vision. Ella watched with tears in her eyes as her cousin explained his work to an interested collector, seeing glimpses of the man she had never stopped believing he could become again. His transformation had not been easy or linear, involving setbacks and struggles that had tested everyone's faith, but his current stability and creative renaissance validated every moment of doubt and every hour of advocacy Ella had invested in his recovery. "You never gave up on him," Gary said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they observed Marcus in his element, confident and articulate as he discussed his artistic process and the symbolism embedded in his work. "Sometimes faith is all we have," Ella replied, leaning back against Gary's chest and feeling the solid warmth of his support. "But it turns out that sometimes faith is enough, especially when it is combined with love, patience, and the right opportunities." The past year had not been easy for any of them. There had been tense family dinners, difficult conversations about boundaries and respect, moments when both Gary and Ella had questioned whether love was enough to overcome the obstacles they faced, and times when the pressure from external expectations had threatened to overwhelm their relationship. But there had also been breakthrough moments that made all the struggle worthwhile and demonstrated the power of authentic connection to transform not just individuals, but entire family systems. The turning point had come when Jamie, in his characteristically direct way, had asked his mother why she was trying to make Uncle Gary sad when happy people were so much more pleasant to be around. Rebecca, faced with her son's pure logic and obvious distress over the family conflict, had been forced to examine her own motivations and fears in a way that was both painful and ultimately liberating. It had taken time, family therapy sessions, and several difficult conversations, but Rebecca had gradually begun to understand that her protective instincts had crossed into controlling behavior that was damaging her relationships with the people she loved most. The process of change had been humbling but ultimately strengthening for the entire family. "I never thought I would say this," Rebecca said, approaching them with 2 glasses of champagne and a smile that carried genuine warmth rather than calculated politeness, "but I think you two have been good for each other and for all of us. Ella, your cousin's work is extraordinary, and I can see why you never stopped believing in his potential." "Thank you, Rebecca," Ella replied, accepting the champagne with genuine warmth and appreciation for how far their relationship had come. "That means more to me than you know, especially coming from someone whose opinion Gary values so much." The relationship between Ella and Rebecca had evolved slowly, built on mutual respect rather than automatic affection, but it had grown into something genuine and supportive. Rebecca had come to appreciate Ella's dedication to her work and her positive influence on Gary, while Ella had learned to see past Rebecca's protective instincts to the love and concern that motivated her actions. Patricia and Thomas O'Connor arrived fashionably late, as was their custom, but their greeting of Ella was warm and genuine, reflecting the acceptance and affection that had developed over months of shared dinners and family events. Patricia had gradually come to appreciate Ella's intelligence and integrity, while Thomas had been impressed by her business acumen when she presented proposals for community outreach programs. "Ella, dear, I wanted to let you know that the board unanimously approved your proposal for the community outreach program," Patricia said, referring to Ella's comprehensive plan to use the gallery space for art therapy sessions with at-risk youth, addiction recovery support groups, and community workshops. "I think it is exactly the kind of initiative that will make this gallery truly special and impactful." "I cannot wait to get started," Ella replied enthusiastically, her eyes lighting up with the passion that had first attracted Gary to her. "Art has such power to heal and transform lives. I have seen it with Marcus, and I know it can help other people find their way back to themselves and discover capabilities they never knew they had." The community outreach program had been Ella's brainchild, born from her recognition that art could serve as both therapy and empowerment for people struggling with various challenges. The program would offer free classes, support groups, and exhibition opportunities for participants, creating a pipeline from healing to artistic expression to economic opportunity. As the evening progressed, Gary found himself watching Ella move through the crowd, engaging with artists, collectors, community members, and his family with equal grace and enthusiasm. She had not changed who she was to fit into his world. Instead, she had helped him understand that his world was much bigger and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. "She is perfect for you, you know," Jamie said, appearing at Gary's elbow with his usual sudden materialization, now 13 and even more perceptive about human relationships. "Mom was wrong about her not being good enough. She makes you smile the way Dad used to make Mom smile before he went away." Gary knelt down to Jamie's level, touched by his nephew's observation and the maturity he had gained over the past year. "You are absolutely right, buddy. Ella makes me very happy, and she makes our whole family better." "Are you going to marry her?" Jamie asked with the directness that only teenagers possess, his question carrying genuine curiosity rather than social expectation. Gary glanced across the room to where Ella was laughing with Marcus and a group of young artists, her face radiant with joy and purpose, and felt his heart swell with certainty about their future together. "I hope so, Jamie. I really hope so." "Good!" Jamie declared with satisfaction and the confidence of someone who understood that happiness was worth pursuing. "Then you can be happy forever, and she can be part of our family officially." As the gallery opening wound down and the last guests departed, Gary and Ella found themselves alone among the artwork that had brought them together in the first place. They wandered back to the piece that had started their conversation that first night, the lighthouse painting that now held a place of honor in the new gallery, surrounded by other works that celebrated resilience, hope, and transformation. "Do you remember what you said about being a lighthouse?" Gary asked, taking her hand, as they stood before the familiar canvas that had witnessed the beginning of their love story. "That sometimes I feel like I am trying to guide people home when they have lost their way," Ella replied, remembering that first conversation with perfect clarity and marveling at how much had changed since that evening. "I think you have it backwards," Gary said softly, turning to face her fully with an expression of such love and admiration that it took her breath away. "You are not the lighthouse, Ella. You are home. You are the safe harbor that people like Marcus, like me, like everyone whose life you touch, sail toward when they need to find their way back to themselves." Ella felt tears spring to her eyes at his words, overwhelmed by the beauty of his perception and the depth of understanding they had built together. "Gary, that is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." "It is also the truest thing I have ever said," he replied, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small velvet box that made Ella's breath catch in her throat and her heart race with anticipation and joy. "Gary," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder as he dropped to one knee right there in the gallery, surrounded by art and dreams and the promise of everything they had built together. "Ella Parker, you came into my life like a force of nature and changed everything about how I see the world and my place in it," Gary said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment and the vulnerability of putting his deepest feelings into words. "You have shown me what it means to love without conditions, to fight for what matters, and to believe in the possibility of redemption and second chances. You have made me a better person, a better son, a better brother, and a better human being. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of the love you have shown me?" Through her tears of joy, Ella saw not just Gary kneeling before her, but everything they had overcome together. Rebecca's interference, family expectations, their own fears and insecurities, the challenges of bridging their different worlds, and the external pressures that had threatened to tear them apart. She saw Marcus across the room, setting up his sculpture with pride and hope in his eyes, representing the power of faith and persistence. She saw the compass Gary had given her, now sitting on their shared nightstand at home, reminding her daily that some people come into our lives to change our direction entirely. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. "Yes, Gary O'Connor, I will marry you and spend my life building a home with you that is big enough for all the people we love and all the dreams we dare to chase together." As Gary slipped the ring onto her finger, a beautiful vintage piece that had belonged to his grandmother, chosen not for its monetary value, but for its history of lasting love and family commitment, Ella realized that her journey had come full circle in the most beautiful way possible. She had entered that gallery over a year ago, hoping that art could heal souls, never expecting that it would transform her own life so completely and connect her to a love that would change everything. The lighthouse in the painting continued to stand strong against the storm, its beam cutting through darkness with unwavering determination. But now Ella understood that sometimes the most important lighthouses are not solitary towers standing against the waves, but the connections we build with other people, the love we choose to nurture despite obstacles, and the homes we create together in a world that can be both beautiful and challenging. As they embraced in the quiet gallery, surrounded by art that celebrated human resilience and creativity, Gary and Ella knew that their story was just beginning. There would be more challenges ahead. There always are when two people choose to build a life together, but they also knew that they had something worth fighting for, a love that had been tested by external pressures and internal doubts, and had emerged stronger, more authentic, and more beautiful than either of them had dared to hope. Marcus approached them with a shy smile, having witnessed the proposal from across the room where he had been carefully positioning his sculpture for optimal lighting. "I guess this means I am getting a cousin-in-law who actually deserves you," he said to Ella, his voice carrying both humor and deep gratitude for the role Gary had played in supporting his recovery. "It means you are getting a family member who believes in second chances as much as I do," Gary replied, extending his hand to Marcus with genuine warmth and respect for the journey he had undertaken. As the three of them stood together in the gallery that had become a symbol of new beginnings and unexpected connections, Ella felt the truth of what she had always known, but had sometimes doubted, that love, when it is real and fierce, and willing to fight for what matters, can indeed heal souls and guide people home to themselves and to each other. The compass Gary had given her had been inscribed with the words, "For those who guide others home," but now she understood that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is not guidance, but companionship, the willingness to walk alongside someone as they find their own way back to themselves, and the courage to let them do the same for us. Outside the gallery windows, San Francisco sparkled in the evening light, full of possibilities and dreams waiting to be discovered. Inside, three people who had found their way to each other despite all odds began planning a future built on the foundation of love, hope, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a chance to come home to themselves and to the people who see their true worth. End.